Forget the painted sunsets and heroic silhouettes. The first truth of the American Wild West was not freedom but smell. A thick mixture of sweat, animals, rotting food, wood, smoke, and human waste hung permanently in the air. Towns did not announce themselves with music or gunfire but with odor, long before a traveler saw a single roof. This was the reality settlers breathed every day, a reality far removed from the polished legends that came later. Bathing was rare, not by choice but by circumstance. Clean water was precious, heating it required labor, and privacy barely existed. Weeks could pass without a full wash. Clothing absorbed everything the body released and then some. Dust glued itself to skin. Grease from cooking fires settled into hair and beards. In summer the heat intensified every scent. In winter layers of fabric trapped moisture and decay. Cleanliness as we know it today simply did not exist. Night brought no relief. Beds were often filled with straw, hay, or rough cloth stretched over wooden frames. These materials invited life of their own. Lice thrived in seams and folds, crawling freely across skin after the lamps were blown out. Fleas moved easily between animals and humans. Sleep was broken by constant itching and stinging. Rest was not guaranteed. Exhaustion became a normal condition, silently shaping tempers and decisions. Human waste sat closer to daily life than most modern minds can tolerate. Outhouses stood near homes for safety and convenience. Some families relieved themselves wherever darkness allowed. Pits filled quickly. When they did, they were covered and a new hole was dug nearby. Rain washed unseen filth into the ground. Flies traveled from waste to food without obstacle. What people consumed was often contaminated long before it reached the table. Rose Pender, who traveled through the West between 1883 and 1888, left behind words that cut through romantic storytelling. She described nights made unbearable by insects that covered her body and bedding. Sleep, she wrote, came only in fragments. Windows had no screens. Bugs moved freely between outhouses, animals, kitchens, and beds. Her account was not exceptional. It was typical. Survival required endurance, not comfort. Illness followed naturally. Stomach pain, fevers, infections, and weakness were constant companions. Many settlers accepted sickness as part of life rather than something preventable. Children grew up surrounded by it. Adults aged faster under its weight. Death was familiar, sometimes sudden, often unexplained. Without understanding germs, people blamed weather, fate, or divine will. The source of danger remained invisible, making fear constant but unfocused. Smell became background noise. People adapted because they had no alternative. Bodies adjusted. Expectations lowered. What would be unbearable today became routine then. Settlers focused on survival tasks: planting, hunting, building, protecting family. Hygiene ranked low when every day demanded physical effort and alertness. Complaints did not change conditions, so most stopped voicing them. Fear shaped behavior as much as hardship. People learned to endure rather than question. Children were taught toughness early, not comfort. Communities bonded through shared suffering, helping neighbors during sickness and burial. Faith, habit, and repetition formed mental armor. The West did not reward weakness. It rewarded those who could tolerate discomfort long enough to build something lasting, even if that foundation rested on filth and risk. For many settlers there was no comparison point. They had left crowded cities or desperate poverty behind. The frontier promised land and autonomy, not comfort. Endurance became a currency. The ability to tolerate filth meant staying alive one more season. Over time, suffering blended into routine. When everyone lived the same way, hardship stopped feeling exceptional and became normal life. Memory softened reality, and hope pushed people forward even when conditions worsened. Survival itself became proof that the sacrifice was worth enduring. Tomorrow always seemed close enough to justify today in their minds always. This is the Wild West that existed before postcards and films reshaped it. A world of resilience forged in discomfort, where daily life meant enduring what could not be fixed. Romance was invented later by those who never slept in those beds or drank that water. So how did millions of people survive this, and why did they accept it? Is this conversation helpful so far? Night in the Wild West was not a pause from hardship, but its sharpest edge. When daylight faded and fires burned low, settlers prepared not for comfort but for endurance. Sleep was something to be chased, guarded, and often lost. The darkness brought silence broken only by insects, animals, and restless bodies. For many pioneers, the bed was not a refuge. It was another battlefield where fatigue met irritation and fear. Most beds were built from whatever materials were available. Straw and hay were common because they were cheap and easy to replace. Over time, these fillings absorbed sweat, dirt, and moisture, becoming a living mass rather than a resting surface. Within them thrived lice, fleas, and mites. Lice earned the nickname seam squirrels because they nested in clothing seams and bedding stitches, moving constantly and multiplying fast. They fed at night, leaving skin inflamed and raw by morning. Insects ruled the hours after sunset. Mosquitoes drifted in thick clouds during warmer months, drawn by breath and body heat. Flies settled wherever warmth remained, crawling across faces and hands without resistance. There were no window screens to block their entry. Cabins and rooms were sealed poorly, with gaps in walls and doors that welcomed every crawling and flying pest. Once inside, these creatures stayed until daylight drove them out. Sleep rarely came uninterrupted. Scratching became a reflex, almost unconscious. People shifted endlessly, trying to find a position that offered brief relief. Each movement stirred the bedding, waking more insects and restarting the cycle. Children cried from irritation. Adults clenched their jaws and waited for dawn. Exhaustion accumulated slowly, night after night, turning patience thin and tempers fragile. The mental toll of sleeplessness was heavy. Fatigue dulled judgment and slowed reaction. A tired settler made mistakes with tools, animals, and firearms. Anxiety grew in the quiet hours when thoughts wandered without distraction. Illness worsened when rest was impossible. The body weakened while the mind remained alert, trapped between wakefulness and collapse. Many pioneers lived in a constant state of partial exhaustion that modern people rarely experience. Contrast this with sleep today. A clean mattress, washed sheets, sealed windows, and silence are often taken for granted. Night now signals safety and restoration. In the Wild West, it signaled vulnerability. Darkness meant surrendering control to whatever shared the room. Comfort was not expected. If sleep came at all, it was considered good fortune rather than a right. Some tried small defenses. Blankets were shaken daily. Bedding was aired in sunlight when possible. Smoke from fires was believed to drive insects away, though its effect was limited. These efforts offered momentary improvement but no lasting solution. Bugs returned with persistence unmatched by human energy. Acceptance replaced resistance. Stories from the era describe nights counted in hours rather than rest. People remembered how long they slept, not how well. A few uninterrupted hours were celebrated. Full nights were rare. This constant deprivation shaped frontier character. Resilience grew not from heroism but from necessity. People learned to function while tired because survival demanded it. Over time the body adapted, but the cost was real. Aging accelerated. Pain lingered. Mood darkened. Sleep deprivation quietly influenced every aspect of daily life, from decision-making to relationships. The Wild West demanded alertness by day and endurance by night. Rest was a fragile privilege, easily stolen by the smallest creature. Understanding this reality reshapes the legend. The frontier was not only won by courage and ambition, but by ordinary people enduring nights that offered no peace. Sleep, the most basic human need, became uncertain and fragile. That struggle, repeated endlessly, reveals the true weight of frontier life more clearly than any gunfight or trail ride ever could. For older generations, this reality resonates deeply because it speaks to health earned through struggle rather than convenience. The settlers did not romanticize their nights. They survived them. Each morning arrived as proof that endurance had won again. Their legacy is not just expansion or conquest, but the quiet strength built in darkness, when sleep failed and resolve carried them forward into another demanding day. Their experience reminds us that comfort is recent, fragile, and deeply tied to dignity, health, and human limits. Toilets in the Wild West were never private, clean, or harmless. They stood as quiet witnesses to daily risk, accepted without question because there was no alternative. An outhouse was usually nothing more than a wooden box placed above a freshly dug pit. Families chose locations close enough for safety at night, yet far enough to reduce smell. Convenience mattered more than sanitation, and survival always outweighed long-term thinking. The pit beneath an outhouse filled faster than many expected. Human waste accumulated quickly, especially in growing settlements or busy homesteads. Once full, the hole was simply covered with soil, and the wooden structure was dragged or rebuilt over a new pit nearby. This cycle repeated endlessly, leaving multiple buried hazards surrounding homes. Rainwater seeped downward, carrying contamination into the ground where wells and streams silently drew from the same soil. The stench was overwhelming, particularly in summer. To fight it, settlers relied on lime or lye. These substances were poured into the pit to reduce smell and discourage insects. The relief was temporary. Odor returned as soon as heat rose again. People learned to associate the sharp scent of lime with necessity rather than cleanliness. It masked decay but never removed danger. Flies were the true threat. They moved freely between waste, food, and skin. A fly landing on a meal had likely visited an outhouse moments earlier. There were no screens to stop them, no understanding of bacteria to warn people. Each bite of food carried unseen risk. Disease traveled on wings, invisible and relentless, spreading quietly through families and camps. Outhouses were also home to creatures that thrived in darkness. Black widow spiders often nested beneath seats or in corners, drawn by warmth and insects. A careless movement could provoke a bite. Pain followed quickly, sometimes accompanied by sickness and fever. Medical help was distant or non-existent. Fear lingered each time someone entered, especially at night when vision failed and imagination filled the gaps. Basic necessities were improvised. Toilet paper did not exist in any manufactured form. People used whatever nature provided. Corn cobs were common, as were leaves, grass, and scraps of cloth. These materials offered little comfort and sometimes caused irritation or injury. Even this routine act reminded settlers that dignity was often sacrificed for practicality. Children learned early that outhouses were places to be endured, not questioned. Elders passed down habits without explanation. Everyone shared the same risks, which made danger feel ordinary. Illness that followed was rarely linked to its source. Stomach pain, fever, and weakness appeared suddenly and spread easily. Without knowledge of germs, people blamed weather, food, or fate. Nighttime visits were the worst. Lanterns cast weak light, shadows moved unpredictably, and smells intensified in still air. Entering an outhouse after dark required courage. Animals prowled nearby. Insects swarmed around light. Every sound heightened awareness of vulnerability. A simple bodily need became an act of exposure. Compared to modern sanitation, this reality feels almost unimaginable. Today, waste disappears instantly, safely, and invisibly. In the Wild West, it lingered near homes, shaping health outcomes silently. What people smelled was unpleasant but familiar. What they could not smell was lethal. Contamination moved through water, hands, and food without warning. This constant exposure reshaped attitudes toward health and risk. People learned to ignore warning signs and normalize discomfort. Communities bonded through shared endurance rather than prevention. Survival created pride, and hardship became proof of worth. Few imagined different systems, and fewer still had power to change them. Acceptance was not ignorance alone but adaptation, a mental shield against fear, uncertainty, and relentless daily vulnerability that defined frontier existence completely. Over time, communities accepted this danger as part of frontier life. Complaints changed nothing. Effort focused on farming, defense, and survival. Sanitation improvements came slowly and unevenly. Many never saw them at all. Life expectancy reflected this constant exposure, though few connected cause and effect. Understanding the outhouse reveals how close death lived to everyday routine. It was not violence or outlaws that claimed the most lives, but ordinary habits repeated daily. The frontier demanded tolerance of conditions that quietly eroded health. The real danger wasn't what people smelled, it was what they couldn't see. Water was the lifeline of the Wild West, yet it often became its quiet executioner. Settlers crossed deserts and plains chasing rivers, springs, and wells, believing water meant safety. What they did not know was that the very systems meant to sustain life were slowly poisoning entire communities. Death rarely arrived dramatically. It came through thirst quenched with invisible danger. Outhouses were frequently placed uphill or close to wells for convenience, never for sanitation. Rainfall carried waste through soil and into groundwater without resistance. Families drank, cooked, and washed with water already compromised. Wells looked clear, tasted normal, and offered no warning. Illness appeared days later, leaving confusion instead of answers. Stagnant water worsened everything. Puddles, barrels, and cisterns became breeding grounds for insects. Flies and mosquitoes thrived in still water, carrying contamination from waste to skin and food. Animals drank from the same sources as people. Each sip connected humans, livestock, and insects in a cycle that spread disease silently. Bathing habits reflected scarcity rather than hygiene. Families reused bathwater, passing it from one person to another, often beginning with children and ending with adults. That same water might later clean clothes or dishes. Nothing was wasted. Unfortunately, contamination accumulated with every reuse, turning conservation into unintended harm. Laundry and cooking shared the same water sources. Greasy pots were rinsed where drinking water was drawn. Clothing soaked downstream from waste runoff. People understood dirt but not microbes. Clean-looking water inspired trust. That trust proved deadly, especially during long migrations and crowded settlements. Cholera exposed the consequences with terrifying clarity. Mormon migrant groups traveling west suffered devastating outbreaks. Entire families collapsed within days. Dehydration and violent illness spread rapidly along shared water routes. Native American communities were struck as well, already weakened by displacement and limited access to clean resources. Observers often described sudden sickness as divine punishment or bad fortune. Few recognized infrastructure failure. There were no filters, pipes, or separation between waste and supply. What appears obvious today was invisible then. Knowledge lagged behind suffering, and improvement arrived too late for many. For older generations, the lesson resonates deeply. Infrastructure determines health, longevity, and dignity. The Wild West lacked these systems, and people paid with their bodies. Survival depended not only on courage but on luck. Clean water was never guaranteed, and its absence reshaped entire lives. Water did not announce its danger with smell or color. It slipped quietly into meals, mouths, and wounds. Each cup carried possibility of survival or death. Communities adapted by praying, enduring, and moving on when tragedy struck. This silent killer shaped migration patterns, cemetery rows, and family histories across the frontier. Attempts to improve water safety were limited by knowledge and resources. Boiling water required fuel many could not spare. Settlements expanded faster than wells could be protected. Temporary solutions became permanent habits. Each generation inherited contaminated practices without understanding their cost, repeating mistakes that shortened lives. Women often noticed patterns first. Children fell sick after rain. Illness followed shared meals. Still, without authority or education, warnings faded. Men prioritized work and defense. Survival tasks overshadowed prevention. Water remained trusted because questioning it threatened the fragile sense of control settlers relied upon. Modern viewers understand that water systems are civilization itself. Pipes, treatment plants, and separation save lives quietly every day. The Wild West lacked this shield. Its people drank hope mixed with risk. Each swallow reflected the frontier bargain endure today for the promise of tomorrow. Dirty water did not discriminate. It claimed the strong and the weak alike. It punished expansion without preparation. Towns rose and fell around poisoned sources. Cemeteries grew quietly beside wells that never changed. Progress came only when understanding caught up with suffering. This hidden threat transformed daily discomfort into fatal consequence. Water, essential and trusted, betrayed those who depended on it. The frontier demanded endurance without protection. Survival required strength and silence. Many paid with shortened lives. Dirty water stands as the most invisible weapon of the Wild West. Its lesson remains clear for every generation that follows: infrastructure saves lives, and neglect kills quietly without mercy, leaving history written not by battles but by preventable loss remembered by those who suffered. In the Wild West, cleanliness carried a different meaning entirely. People did not measure safety by soap or scent but by survival. Washing too often seemed risky when cold water, wind, and exhaustion ruled daily life. Dirt was visible, familiar, and accepted, while sickness appeared sudden and mysterious. Settlers believed strength came from endurance rather than removal of grime. A body hardened by labor was seen as protected, not neglected. This mindset shaped habits across towns and trails, creating a culture where smell signaled life continuing, not failure or neglect. That belief guided choices, decisions, routines, fears, instincts daily everywhere. Soap existed, but it was crude and unforgiving. Many families made it themselves using animal fat mixed with ash or plant material. The process produced a harsh substance that cleaned clothing better than skin. When used on the body, it often caused burning, dryness, and cracking. Irritated skin invited infection, reinforcing the idea that washing led to illness. People remembered the pain more than the cleanliness. Soap became something practical for tools and laundry, not a daily companion for the body, especially during harsh seasons when survival demanded strength, caution, restraint, patience, habits repeated, learned carefully, always, everywhere, then accepted. Among Mexican communities and travelers, soapweed offered a different approach. Derived from the yucca plant, the root produced a gentle lather when crushed and mixed with water. It cleaned hair effectively without stripping oils or irritating skin. Observers noted how hair washed this way appeared soft, clean, and healthy. These practices surprised outsiders who expected discomfort from washing. Still, such methods remained localized. Cultural knowledge traveled slowly, and many settlers dismissed unfamiliar traditions, choosing endurance over experimentation even when gentler options quietly existed nearby, but overlooked, accepted, ignored, doubted, rarely trusted fully, then continued unchanged for generations, onward, alone, everywhere. A powerful belief shaped behavior across the frontier. Many feared that frequent bathing opened pores, allowing disease to enter the body. Cold water was especially mistrusted. Exposure after washing was blamed for fevers, coughs, and weakness. These ideas spread through experience and rumor rather than science. When someone fell ill after bathing, the act itself received blame. When someone avoided water and remained healthy, avoidance felt proven. Cleanliness became associated with vulnerability, while dirt seemed to offer protection against unseen threats lurking in air and water, reinforcing fear. Habits, routines, traditions repeated daily, quietly, endlessly accepted by communities widely everywhere. Body odor carried little shame. Everyone smelled similar, shaped by labor, animals, smoke, and dust. Scent marked effort and survival rather than neglect. Perfume was rare and unnecessary. A strong smell meant a person worked, endured, and lived fully within their environment. Complaints were uncommon because nothing could change it. Social norms adjusted accordingly. People judged character through actions, reliability, and resilience, not cleanliness. In this world, the absence of odor would have seemed unusual, even suspicious, rather than desirable or admirable to others living there daily. Without comparison, context, alternative standards, modern comfort, knowledge, awareness, expectation elsewhere than existing. Harsh soap left its mark. Cracked hands bled. Skin peeled and burned. People noticed irritation more than cleanliness, strengthening distrust. For women, whose skin faced water more often through washing and cooking, damage was common. Men accepted roughness as part of work. Children learned early to avoid unnecessary washing. Pain taught restraint. Over time, these experiences shaped collective memory. Soap became associated with discomfort and risk rather than relief. Clean skin was not comfort. It was vulnerability, exposure, and unnecessary suffering in a demanding world where survival outweighed pleasure, ease, softness, preference, habit, desire entirely, always, then accepted silently daily. This cultural mindset explains the paradox. People did not reject cleanliness because they enjoyed filth. They rejected it because they believed it endangered health. Safety meant warmth, dryness, and routine. Change invited risk. Cleanliness challenged tradition and experience. Only later did science reverse these beliefs. For the frontier generation, caution preserved life. Cleanliness was feared, not desired. Understanding this reveals a world guided by logic shaped through hardship. Their choices were not ignorance but adaptation, built slowly through survival, loss, and lessons learned the hard way over years, lived, endured, remembered, shared, repeated, justified, accepted, deeply rooted, then everywhere, always. Saloons stood at the center of Wild West life, glowing with light, noise, and promise. Men gathered to drink, talk, gamble, and forget the hardships waiting outside. These rooms felt alive, almost welcoming, after lonely trails and silent workdays. Yet beneath laughter and music, danger brewed quietly. The same place that offered connection also carried sickness, turning friendship into exposure without anyone realizing the cost. Every night repeated this pattern. Shared towels were common along saloon bars, hanging within reach of every customer. After a drink, men wiped beer foam from mustaches and mouths using the same cloth. Dozens of faces touched it each evening. Spit, sweat, and breath soaked into fabric and stayed there. Without washing, these towels became moving carriers, spreading illness through simple habit disguised as hospitality that felt friendly, safe, familiar routine nightly everywhere inside saloons. Spitting culture defined many saloons and public spaces across the frontier. Tobacco chewing filled mouths and demanded constant release. Cuspidors lined bar fronts, though floors received just as much attention. Men spat casually while talking or laughing. Sawdust covered the mess, hiding moisture and filth. Over time the floor became saturated, transforming an innocent covering into a breeding surface for disease that threatened every person standing drinking nearby nightly inside. Sawdust created a false sense of cleanliness. It absorbed liquid quickly and muted smell temporarily. Bar owners relied on it as maintenance. Customers trusted it as protection. Yet every step stirred dried particles back into the air. Each breath pulled invisible matter into lungs. Germs traveled upward from floors into bodies, quietly finding new hosts among crowds gathered for warmth, conversation, alcohol, laughter, music, smoke, heat, fatigue, proximity, risk nightly. Respiratory illness flourished in these spaces. Tuberculosis and pneumonia spread through shared air and surfaces. Coughing blended with laughter. Fever followed days later. Travelers slept on saloon floors when rooms were unavailable, breathing close to spittle and dust. Night after night, strangers rotated through the same contaminated space, carrying sickness onward to camps, trains, and homes beyond town limits where families, children, elders awaited unaware. Exposure continued spreading quietly outward. Attempts to control spitting eventually appeared, driven by fear rather than understanding. Some towns passed laws banning the habit in saloons and public places. Penalties were severe. Fines reached hundreds of dollars. Jail sentences lasted months or longer. Enforcement reflected desperation. Authorities recognized danger even without scientific explanation, using punishment to force behavior change where education was impossible because disease spread faster than belief, tradition, pride, denial, resistance, habit allowed. Romantic images of saloons hide this truth completely. Paintings show camaraderie and charm. Stories highlight music and bravado. Reality was closer and darker. The same space that built community also dismantled health. Every shared laugh carried risk. Every friendly gesture transmitted more than warmth. Social survival came paired with physical cost few could see during crowded evenings, smoky rooms, winter storms, loneliness, need, belonging, acceptance, routine, comfort, illusion, familiarity, persistence. For older generations, this contrast resonates strongly. Social spaces still matter deeply. Cafes, clubs, and gatherings shape identity and memory. The saloon fulfilled that role on the frontier. People accepted risk to avoid isolation. Loneliness felt more dangerous than sickness. Community offered purpose. Even when it harmed health, shared space preserved spirit and sanity within harsh conditions. Uncertainty, violence, labor, fear, migration, loss, hardship, endurance, necessity, habit, hope, connection, survival. Understanding saloons as disease factories reframes frontier life. Danger was not always violent or visible. It sat on countertops and floors. It hung in air. People drank it in unknowingly. Progress later required plumbing, education, and medical science. Until then, survival meant choosing connection over caution again and again because isolation threatened morale, purpose, identity, endurance, faith, continuity, tradition, routine, memory, belonging, humanity, resilience, stability, sanity, strength, hope, meaning, life. The Wild West saloon was never harmless fun. It was a mirror of frontier existence. Warmth and danger shared the same walls. Laughter echoed alongside sickness. People gathered anyway, because life demanded it. The final irony remains clear. Germs drank with everyone, unseen, shaping history one crowded evening at a time where memories formed bonds, strengthened risks, ignored habits, repeated endurance, chosen community, survived cost, accumulated silently, endlessly, together always. In the Wild West, pain lived close to the body. Teeth, lungs, eyes, and muscles bore constant punishment from work, weather, and neglect. There were no daily rituals of prevention, no small comforts to soften damage. When pain arrived, it was endured until it could no longer be tolerated. Relief did not mean healing. It meant removal, loss, and survival, moving forward with one less part than before. Toothbrushes and toothpaste were unknown to most frontier families. Mouths carried the marks of hard food, grit, and time. Teeth cracked on dried meat and hard bread. Cavities spread slowly, turning dull aches into relentless torment. People learned to eat carefully, favoring one side of the mouth, adjusting habits around pain that never fully disappeared. When pain became unbearable, treatment was swift and brutal. Barbers and blacksmiths performed extractions using pliers and strength. There were no sterile tools, no anesthesia, no recovery rooms. The patient sat still while metal clamped onto bone. A sharp pull ended months of suffering in seconds, replacing it with shock, blood, and relief mixed together. Whiskey served as the only comfort. A strong swallow dulled the senses and steadied nerves. It did not remove pain but blurred its edges long enough to endure the act. Screams were common. Fainting was not rare. Afterwards the wound healed slowly, often poorly. Infection followed many extractions, yet people accepted the risk because the alternative was living with agony that consumed daily thought. Dust was another relentless enemy. Wind swept across plains and towns, lifting clouds of fine particles into the air. Settlers breathed it constantly. It coated skin, settled in hair, and lodged between teeth. Eyes burned and watered. Lungs filled with grit. Coughing became normal, and breathing deep air brought discomfort rather than relief. Dust storms transformed landscapes into choking darkness. Visibility vanished. People covered faces with cloth, though it offered little protection. Homes filled with particles through cracks and gaps. Food became gritty. Water turned cloudy. Teeth ground against sand with every bite, wearing enamel down quickly. Damage accumulated quietly until pain followed. Cattle suffered alongside humans. Herds struggled to breathe during storms. Dust irritated their eyes and lungs, weakening animals depended upon for food and labor. Sick livestock meant hungry families. Settlers watched animals collapse from exhaustion, understanding that the same air filled their own bodies. Survival required enduring conditions that punished all living things equally. Daily pain shaped character. People woke sore, worked through discomfort, and slept aching. Complaints changed nothing. Medical care was distant, expensive, or non-existent. Children grew up watching adults function while hurting, learning that endurance mattered more than comfort. Strength was measured by silence and persistence rather than relief. Modern viewers might struggle to imagine such acceptance. Today pain signals emergency. In the frontier, it signaled normalcy. People adapted by lowering expectations and raising tolerance. Survival required resilience that bordered on stoicism. Teeth were lost. Lungs weakened. Vision faded. Life continued anyway because stopping meant failure. This suffering was not romantic. It was grinding and constant. Yet it built a generation capable of enduring conditions that would overwhelm most today. Respect comes not from admiration of hardship, but from recognition of human limits pushed repeatedly. Pain was not treated. It was removed, endured, and left behind as people moved forward, carrying scars as proof of survival rather than symbols of defeat. For many elders, this reality evokes respect rather than nostalgia. It reveals how comfort reshapes values and how hardship trains discipline. Frontier people did not seek suffering, yet they accepted it as payment for land, independence, and possibility. Their endurance was practical, not heroic, shaped by repetition and necessity. Each missing tooth, damaged lung, or scarred eye became part of a shared language of survival. Understanding this pain clarifies history without glorifying it. It reminds us that progress is measured not only by achievement but by the quiet reduction of suffering across generations, a change earned slowly through knowledge, compassion, and systems built to protect bodies from the pain once accepted as normal life. It also asks modern audiences to recognize how dignity returns when pain is no longer the price of simply waking up alive each day for ordinary people. Life in the Wild West did not follow a single pattern of survival. Experience varied sharply by gender, work, and cultural background. Hygiene was shaped not only by hardship but by expectation, responsibility, and tradition. Understanding these differences reveals a frontier more complex than legend, where daily habits reflected roles, values, and quiet forms of resilience rather than a shared uniform struggle. Women generally carried a heavier burden of cleanliness within the home. Each morning, many walked to nearby streams or springs to wash their faces and hands before the day began. This simple ritual offered refreshment and dignity. Though full bathing remained rare, these moments created a sense of order and self-respect amid disorder. Laundry demanded time, strength, and patience. Women scrubbed clothes by hand using cold water and rough soap, often kneeling for hours. Garments dried in open air, collecting dust again before use. Despite limits, clean clothing mattered. It protected skin, reduced insects, and preserved family health as much as possible under frontier conditions. Men lived differently. Cowboys, soldiers, and laborers spent weeks in the open, focused on movement and endurance. Bathing rarely fit their routines. Rivers served when weather allowed. Winter eliminated even that option. Clothes stayed on until worn thin. Smell and grime became marks of labor rather than neglect, accepted without reflection. Cultural background also shaped hygiene. In Deadwood, archaeologists uncovered tweezers linked to Chinese residents. These tools served grooming needs unfamiliar to many settlers. Hair was plucked rather than shaved, reflecting different standards of care. Such practices demonstrated attention to the body even within harsh surroundings, challenging assumptions that frontier life erased personal maintenance. Not all men ignored appearance. Some well-known figures valued grooming as identity. Wild Bill Hickok maintained long hair with pride. George Armstrong Custer scented his hair with cinnamon oil, a personal preference amid chaos. These choices offered familiarity and control, small comforts that affirmed individuality in a demanding environment. These differences reveal survival strategies rather than moral judgments. Women protected households through routine care. Men prioritized mobility and strength. Cultural groups preserved traditions quietly. No approach was superior. Each responded to environment, labor, and belief. Hygiene reflected adaptation, shaped by necessity rather than ignorance or neglect. Viewed together, the Wild West becomes less mythic and more human. Cleanliness varied, suffering was shared unevenly, and dignity appeared in unexpected forms. Progress did not arrive equally or quickly. People survived by choosing what mattered most within limited options, often sacrificing comfort to preserve life and purpose. Older audiences recognize the meaning of these contrasts. They speak to responsibility, division of labor, and endurance learned through experience. Cleanliness today feels effortless because systems support it. On the frontier, effort replaced systems. Every clean shirt, washed face, or scented hair carried intention. These acts did not erase hardship, but they preserved identity. History often favors simple stories, yet reality resists simplicity. Men, women, and cultures navigated hygiene differently, balancing risk and relief. Their choices reflected logic shaped by survival. Judging them by modern standards misses the point. Understanding them reveals strength expressed quietly through adaptation rather than comfort. The frontier demanded compromise. Water scarcity, labor demands, and climate forced decisions that reshaped daily life. Cleanliness became situational, not moral. What mattered was functioning tomorrow. Each group found its balance. Some washed, some endured, some adapted traditions. All carried forward within limits they did not choose. The Wild West was not heroic because it was clean. It was heroic because people endured conditions modern life rejects. Women, men, and cultures survived through patience, habit, and restraint. Their resilience grew from acceptance, not ignorance. Remembering this truth honors effort without romance and reminds us how far dignity has traveled alongside progress. It closes the story with humility. Progress did not erase struggle overnight. It arrived slowly through learning and cooperation. By seeing differences clearly, we respect those who lived them. Their world was harsh, unequal, and demanding. Yet within it, humanity persisted, shaped by endurance we rarely need today. That endurance remains the final lesson of the frontier experience for every generation willing to look past myth and see real lives shaped by necessity, courage, patience, and limits alone without comfort or mercy.